Hello and welcome to Protect Ukraine Now YouTube channel. Lies, propaganda, and other forms of misinformation are main tools of any authoritarian regime, and Russia is no exception. As advocates for Ukraine, we're very much accustomed to see it everywhere. On Facebook, X, YouTube, every media is heavily infiltrated with Russian bots or other forms of influence. Sadly, we even get to see it in the White House. However, most of the time, Russian propaganda is not pretending to be anything else but pro-Russian information source. Today, I want to show you a case where Russian propaganda is lurking somewhere where you expected the least. This morning, I had an opportunity to give an interview on a Ukraine-friendly channel, AZ News, where I was invited together with two other guests. The topic of discussion was the latest call between President Trump and the Russian dictator Putin, where they discussed 30 days ceasefire and everything that had to do with that agreement.
And joining me now to discuss the latest development are Telizhenko, former Ukrainian diplomat and advisor to the Prosecutor General of Ukraine in 2014 and 15, joining from Basel, Switzerland. Mr. Alik, Protect Ukraine Now organization, joining from Chicago, United States. And Professor Mark Meyrovich, Professor of State University of New York Maritime College. Welcome to all of you, gentlemen.
To my great surprise, one of the invited guests turned out to be a Russian asset. And that was no one else but former Ukrainian diplomat, Andrei Telizhenko. This became very apparent to me the moment Andrei started talking. As we all know, Russian propaganda using specific language to describe their position on Ukraine.
But this is a proxy war between the United States and Russia. Unfortunately, as my government, Kiev regime, NATO, nobody wants Ukraine into NATO. This is World War III. No, but they've moved forward, and this is why we have today's conflict in Ukraine and millions of people dead from both sides. Ukraine was begging to go into NATO. Ukraine put NATO into its constitution, which is in right now, and that's where they're pushing to join NATO. So there is a clear point of this provocation from the Ukrainian government at that time, during Poroshenko, and then with Zelensky. They could have implemented the Minsk agreement. They could have got this war done. It would be over. Ukraine could have had Donbass as an autonomy, and there would be no bloodshed more than was spilled before this, with the civil war in Donbass. So today we're talking about, Ukraine is being put in this plaque on the table, and was used by the former Biden administration to wage this war against Russia.
Now, again, I'm very much accustomed to Russian propaganda. My biggest concern was that this gentleman came to talk under a pretense that he is a Ukraine supporter. And while he did not say that explicitly, having a title of a former Ukrainian diplomat implies that he is here to advocate for Ukraine. This obviously wasn't the case, and he was definitely misleading the rest of the attendees, and most importantly, viewers, that he is here as a Ukraine-friendly person. Later in that day, I wrote this message to the channel where I was participating in the broadcast, and I clarified the situation. Here's what I wrote. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today during your broadcast. I am writing to point out that Andrei Telizhenko, who identifies himself as a former Ukrainian diplomat, was 100% speaking Russian propaganda narratives. I believe in freedom of speech and objective journalism where each side of an issue has a voice. However, I also believe that proper disclosures matter. When I come on your show, I do my best to be as objective as I can be discussing specific issues. At the same time, I make it clear that I represent an American NGO that advocates for military aid to Ukraine, and hence I have taken a side, and that side is Ukraine. Andriy identifies himself as a former Ukrainian diplomat, which makes your viewers believe we are all on the same side supporting Ukraine. His words are perceived as coming from someone who speaks for Ukraine. This is very misleading and deceiving of your viewers. If Andriy wants to talk Moscow narratives, he should identify himself as a supporter of Russian Federation. I appreciate your consideration on this matter, and once again, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. So I'm very hopeful that AZ News will take that into the account next time they invite someone like Andriy. I also hope they will issue a clarification for their own viewers as to the nature of this participant. I also have done a little digging on this very Andriy Telizhenko, and I came up with a few articles pointing out that he already identified himself as a Russian asset. Here's an article on Tresury.gov that has the following paragraph. Former Ukrainian government official Konstantin Kuluk, Alexander Onchchenko, Andriy Telizhenko, and current Ukrainian member of parliament Alexander Dubinsky have publicly appeared of affiliating themselves with Derkach through the coordinated dissemination of promotion of fraudulent and unsustained allegations involving a U.S. political candidate. They have made repeated public statements to advance disinformation narratives that U.S. government officials have engaged in corrupt dealings in Ukraine. So I think he apparently was taking part in very famous Burisma discussions related to former President Biden and his son. Here's another article by CNN, specifically talking about the U.S. Department revoked the visa of former Ukrainian diplomat who has worked with Republicans to spread baseless conspiracy theories about Biden family and foreign meddling in 2016. Now, obviously, these publications are not a proof of any sort that Andriy Telizhenko is indeed a Russian asset. However, taking that into account, plus what I have heard today, makes me believe that this gentleman is definitely has an agenda of his own, and he is driven by motives that I cannot explain by ways other than his interest in promoting Russian narratives. Now, I want to spend the rest of this video analyzing and adding a little context to what we have discussed during the broadcast. Obviously, we were limited by time and we had to be answering the questions we were asked. Right now is a good opportunity to discuss the rest of critical points that I didn't have a chance to make during the show.
Russia and Ukraine effectively launched air attacks, damaging each other's infrastructure almost immediately after the telephone conversation between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And we also know that Russian forces carried out drone attacks on 2 hospitals in Ukraine. What is your reading of the current situation in general?
We have to understand that the peace talks that are happening throughout these last years, they're not just today's peace talks with Trump and Vladimir Putin, which are the most important ones, and hopefully they'll lead to some result of actual peace in Ukraine. But this is a proxy war between the United States and Russia. The Secretary of State Rubio confirmed this, not just my words.
So addressing lies and propaganda is very important. No, this is not a proxy war between Russia and the United States. Ukraine is under attack by Russian Federation. Ukraine fights for its survival, for its independence, for the chance to live their own lives the way they deem necessary, speak the language they want to speak, have holidays they want to have. United States of America is helping Ukraine strictly because of people like myself, advocates for Ukraine, supporters of Ukraine, or simply people who are not indifferent to Russia killing, torturing, raping, and otherwise committing crimes inside Ukraine. As we have seen historically, both presidents are not exactly eager to help Ukraine.
And we remember all those peace talks before, when Ukraine's army was surrounded, or they were having a lot of losses. They had the Minsk I, Minsk II. Then when Kyiv were surrounded, the Istanbul agreements, and never Ukraine followed in on those agreements at all. Unfortunately, as my government, Kyiv regime.
Actually, that was Russia who broke Minsk agreements. I also want to point out that Kiev regime is a terminology used by Russia. No one else is referring to Ukraine government in such a form. And Andrei Telizhenko, being a Russian asset or person advocating Russian interests, is using exactly that terminology.
And I think the phone call is between the United States and Russia, first of all. They need to settle their differences. And then Ukraine and everything else will be put on, and is on the table, but will be discussed.
Watch how Mr. Telizhenko denies Ukraine sovereignty by implying that the future of the relationship between Ukraine and Russia should be decided between Russia and the United States. And it's up to those two entities how the war is going to end.
Moving furthermore depends on what Ukraine's government decides in this situation, because they're putting out red lines which are already not talkable in anybody in the world. NATO, nobody wants Ukraine into NATO. This is World War III. And this conflict would have never started if Ukraine would just, the United States would just support and say Ukraine will not join NATO. It's a red line.
There are definitely some obstacles for Ukraine before it can get into NATO, specifically the United States and Germany and perhaps some other countries will not vote for Ukraine to be accepted as a NATO member. However, stating that no one wants Ukraine as a NATO member is certainly a lie. Furthermore, suggesting that accepting Ukraine into NATO equals World War III is Russian propaganda talk point. Obviously, Ukraine is being supported by every NATO country for over 3 years. Every NATO country, to some degree, supported Ukraine for 3 years. So, for all practical purposes, NATO is supporting Ukraine. Yet, as you can see, we're not in a World War III situation. We are heading toward that possible scenario, but for a totally different reason. The next world war will be upon us because of appeasement of aggressor. Every time we let authoritarian regimes like Russia, China, or North Korea take upper hand over free societies, like the one we have in the United States, like the one Ukrainian people are trying to build in Ukraine. Every time we let those countries succeed, we are getting ourselves closer to a bigger conflict. And World War III is definitely going to happen if we do not stop aggressors.
No, but they've moved forward, and this is why we have today's conflict in Ukraine and millions of people dead from both sides, and Russians and Ukrainians are suffering.
Another lie is millions of people that have perished in this war. Except for this time, it's probably a lie by Mr. Trump rather than Russia. But again, this is misinformation. There are definitely thousands and tens of thousands of people who have died in this war. Fortunately, we're not anywhere close to millions.
Mr. Kastman, Ukraine does have its own red lines. It's about Ukraine's territorial integrity, its sovereignty, about certain essential linchpins to which President Zelensky referred to on a number of occasions. And Russia has got its own red lines. What is your reflection on this latest telephone conversation? And do you think that things are going to change or not?
Well, this latest phone conversation underscores that Putin understands only language of force. As we could see immediately after the phone call, that he continued bombarding Ukraine territory, infrastructure, and hitting civilians. So the only language, again, that he will understand is force, and the only peace ever possible in Ukraine is peace through strength. And for that reason, Ukraine must be supported militarily to a degree where it can deter any future aggression. And I would like to disagree with Andrew that the war started over NATO. Ukraine was never asking to be a NATO member before full-scale aggression. And frankly, at this point in time, I'm not even sure if NATO is in a position to defend Ukraine. And in fact, we see insufficient production in the West. We see insufficient readiness to deter any aggression against Europe itself. So again, Ukraine is fighting for its survival. People on the front line defending their homeland, their women, their children against rape, torture, and other crimes against humanity that Russia is conducting on Ukraine's territory. It is up to NATO and West, United States, to put their act together finally and support independence of Ukraine. And what we witnessed today is an attempt to normalize the relationship with Russia, which is going to be a segue to a next aggression, next war. The biggest mistakes that the United States has made was in 1991 when they forgave Russia for every crime they have committed in the past, and they decided to normalize those relationships.
I guess I didn't answer the question about what do I think about red lines drawn by Russia and Ukraine. In my opinion, the way those red lines are being defined at the moment, there's no overlap between what Russia and Ukraine can agree on. Hence, there's really no opportunity for meaningful peace negotiations. That's why we hear a lot of talk, but there's no actual outcome that Russia or Ukraine or United States can report as a successful achievement.
Not a full one. And we also understand that some of the issues related to maritime ceasefire could have been discussed during the course of that telephone conversation. In your judgment, what specific terms could have been actually discussed for the proposed maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea? And how do you see their potential prospective enforcement?
Well, I think these are moot points. I don't think these are relevant points. We don't even know what they agreed to, because obviously it didn't take root.
Yeah.
You ask your question, will peace take root? It's completely impossible to understand whether there can be peace if we don't know what they talked about or what they agreed to. Because, for example, the readout of the Russians was different than the readout of the United States. I believe the readout of the Russians said that there will be no military or intelligence support for Ukraine.
Yeah.
But the U.S. readout didn't say that. So since we don't know exactly what they agreed to.
So here, Professor Moritz is absolutely correct. There are two different readouts. Russian readout is actually twice as long. It is far more aggressive. It's very hard to understand whether both sides agreed on certain terms, or this is, for example, Russian position only. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the red lines by Russia and their allies by Ukraine. They're set up in such a way there's really no opportunity for them to agree on something meaningful. And that's why we see this confusion and the phone call, this negotiation process at the moment is really stalling, and there's a lot of talk, but no meaningful outcome that either side can report.
You want to analyze what the agreement is, but we don't know what the agreement is.
Yeah.
And in terms of the ceasefire, whether this is technically a ceasefire or not, we don't know. The truth of the matter is, where we sit right now, we have absolutely no concept whatsoever as to whether there's going to be peace or not, because Ukraine wasn't in the table. Ukraine wasn't on the phone call. The Europeans are not on the phone call. Everybody needs to be on this phone call. The United States is pivotal, clearly. And President Trump is pivotal, clearly. But we need everybody in here to understand what we're doing and whether we are reaching peace or we're just reaching some illusion or delusion of peace, which is exactly what is happening in all the other conflicts in the world where there's wishful thinking for peace. And that's what we have here. Wishful thinking that maybe there'll be peace, but then there isn't any. So I am very pessimistic based on what this was agreed to, since you actually said that it was violated right away.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we have a road to peace here, because we're not clarifying what it was that they agreed to. So I think that's a pivotal point.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear from the other guests as to what they think is the basis for a peace agreement, because so far, I don't really see it.
To answer Professor Marowitz's question, well, at the moment, there are no basis for peace agreement. As we have seen from the statements put out by Russians, the first thing Putin went after is the cessation of all military support for Ukraine, including intelligence sharing. Obviously, they're going for disabling Ukraine from their ability to defend themselves and be efficient, be able to fight against this aggression or any future aggression. Before even they talked about concessions in terms of territory, they started the conversation with limitations on Ukrainian military. This is definitely not acceptable by Ukraine. And again, the way things look like at the moment, there's nothing to agree on. There's nothing to discuss.
Ukraine was begging to go into NATO. Ukraine put NATO into its constitution, which is in right now, and that's where they're pushing to join NATO. So there is a clear point of this provocation from the Ukrainian government at that time, during Poroshenko and then with Zelensky. They could have implemented the Minsk agreement. They could have got this war done. It would be over.
Here, Mr. Telizhenko moves on with his propaganda tour, insisting that somehow Ukraine putting NATO membership into their constitution somehow makes it anywhere close to the reality. Now, obviously, whatever Ukraine is going to put into their constitution has nothing to do with other countries accepting Ukraine into the NATO. Now, another propaganda is this is somehow is a provocation. Provocation in terms of what? Ukraine is seeking NATO membership in order to seek safety from its neighbor on the east side, that is Russia. Every other country that joined NATO, they asked to be added to that alliance. They begged to be part of this alliance that going to hopefully protect them from who? From Russia. Why? Because Russia is the aggressor. So really, there's no provocation here.
Ukraine could have Donbass as an autonomy, and there would be no bloodshed more than was spilled before this with the civil war in Donbass. So today we're talking about
One more propaganda. There are obviously no civil war in Donbass. What happened in Donbass? Russian forces went in and they occupied, annexed that territory. There's nothing that the occupation of Donbass or Crimea or any other regions of Ukraine has nothing to do with any civil war.
What could lead to peace? The situation in Ukraine, where Ukraine was built as anti-Russia by the foreign coup in 2014 and afterwards, the last 10 years, where I was in the government, and I think God left that government. And I saw what was happening from the United States and the G7 ambassadors going around telling what to do and how Ukraine to push against Russia and to seize anything former Soviet and former Russian history that we had together, which we were part of one country for more than 350 years.
Soviet history that Russia and Ukraine had together is a history of abuse of Ukraine by Russia, just like Russia abused every other republic that was part of Soviet Union. So there's really no common history that is peaceful and something that both countries can actually be proud of, speaking in the same voice about same events.
Today, Ukraine is being put this flag on the table and was used by the former Biden administration to wage this war against Russia.
Those of you who follow our channel know that Biden definitely did not start the war against Russia. Biden was actually very hesitant to help Ukraine in their struggle. The military aid Biden administered to Ukraine was insufficient, and if Biden actually wanted to wage a war against Russia, he would have completely utilized his capabilities, his presidential drawdown authority, so that Ukraine can get all the weapons it needs right away.
Ukraine needs to change its government to a neutral government, have elections, because today's president is illegitimate by the Constitution of Ukraine. Article 110 of the Constitution of Ukraine limits him to 4 years. Only the parliament has the legitimacy to prolong its power during the military conflicts and wars, even though Ukraine has no official war against Russia. It never announced it.
Yes, Ukraine didn't declare a war against Russia, but Mr. Telizhenko forgets that Russia didn't declare a war against Ukraine either. They supposedly conducting a special military operation. Furthermore, elections in Ukraine definitely needed, and they will take place, and Ukraine will hopefully elect a leader that is not neutral, but as a pro-Ukrainian against Moscow. And that event, those elections, they definitely, again, necessary, but Ukrainian people will decide when those elections should be taking place.
And sign peace agreements with Russia and let the United States leave Ukraine alone, get its sovereignty back, and this is the only way to peace.
And of course, leaving Ukraine alone implies no military assistance to Ukraine, meaning Ukraine is on its own against Russian aggression. I cannot speak for the government of the United States, but advocates for Ukraine, those of us who call the Congress, call our senators, we will not allow that to happen. We're going to make sure that Ukraine is supported.
Mr. Kastman, I mean, we talked about Western military aid to Ukraine. It's still underway. UK and its European allies still supporting Ukraine, and also the United States, of course, naturally continues to support Ukraine. It has been said that one of the Russian conditions is that for a full ceasefire to be attained, this support should end. What is your reflection on this particular point? Because European allies are effectively saying that for Ukraine to be able to negotiate a very sensible peace deal, its position must be strong. Bearing in mind this dichotomy, which we observe within the confines of these negotiations, would you say that peace is not just in the offing, but it is unlikely as long as this particular stage of the negotiations are concerned?
Not only the peace is in question, it's quite impossible the way it is right now. Russia needs to leave Ukrainian territory, and definitely Ukraine needs to be in a position to at least deter Russia from any future aggression. The way it is right now, Russia only underscores their aggressive intent to occupy Ukraine fully at some point in time, at least. All these peace talks really add up to nothing until Ukraine is able to defend itself successfully. Again, NATO is not what it used to be. It's not in a position to defend itself. It's not in a position to defend Ukraine the way it is right now. It should take the remaining assets, the frozen $300 billion they still have available, invest that heavily in weapons production for Ukraine, in Ukraine, and that's the only way to assure Russia will never try again any future aggression.
Let me clarify a little bit on the point I was making here. There are $300 billion in Russian frozen assets in Europe. Europe doesn't have much money for military procurement. The United States is not willing to invest in military expenditures, not at the moment, not in the sufficient quantities. Ukraine needs weapons to be in a position of strength to resist Russia and make sure it is able to achieve lasting peace. The best way forward is to take $300 billion of Russian money and invest it into drone and other military production for Ukraine, either in Ukraine or perhaps Poland or other countries where production can be easily unrolled. Ukraine can help with that procurement by perhaps sending people who are going to work those factories. I'd like to mention that mobilization is not necessarily fighting at the front line. When a country is at the point where it is fighting for its survival, this is absolutely appropriate to mobilize people to work factory jobs. So Ukraine has the people. There are obviously people who are willing to work on military production in Europe, other countries, and there are $300 billion in Russian assets. This makes perfect sense to take that money and use it for production of weapons for Ukraine and Europe. I'm going to leave a link to the original interview in the description to this video. I'll encourage you guys to watch it in full. That's quite an interesting conversation we had this morning. In conclusion, the current peace negotiations or ceasefire rather negotiations, they are fruitless. Not until there's incentive for Russia to negotiate, there will be no meaningful results. The only way to get Russia to a point where they are actually interested in having a conversation about peace is through strength. The only language that a bully and thug like Mr. Putin understands is a language of strength. The only way this war is going to end and in a meaningful and lasting way is through strength. The best way to help Ukraine today is calling your senators, calling your representatives, and ask them to support Ukraine militarily. We have that ability to continue military aid to Ukraine. Europe hopefully is going to step up and do their part. Most importantly, I hope there'll be a way to encourage our legislators to push both President Trump and their prime ministers in Europe to take the money that was seized from Russian Federation and use it to build weapons for Ukraine. If you are in America, please call your senators, please call your representatives. Also, if you find this video interesting, please share it with your friends and family. Thank you, and until the next time.